Have you ever wondered what it would be like to see your entire family turn against you at the worst possible moment? I thought I knew every limit of humiliation, but nothing prepared me for what I experienced when it all came crashing down that morning. My daughter's face, scarred by something no one should ever have to face so young. My brother's laughter and my parents' silence still echo in my head, as if they were trapped there. For a moment, I tried to believe that it could be reversed, but fear took over before I could react. It wasn't just a slap in the face, nor just a passing embarrassment. It was the kind of survival that changes everything, even the way you view the people who raised you. But before I tell you what happened that day, let me show you what my life was like before everything turned upside down. I was born on August 29, 1992, in the suburb of Oak Ridge, a medium-sized city in the Greater Toronto Area, Canada. When I talk about my childhood, I don't remember holidays or celebrations. What comes to mind first is the smell of early brewed coffee, Richard with his newspaper folded at the head of the table, and Susan, my mother, tidying the kitchen before 7 in the morning. From an early age, I understood that our house had clear rules. No one raised their voice, no one left a mess in sight, and, most importantly, no one questioned my father's decisions. Our house had a narrow hallway, old carpet, and a dining table that was the center of everything. When the phone rang, only Richard could answer. If the doorbell rang at night, Susan would first look out the window before opening it. I grew up in that rigid, almost military environment, where the smallest details of everyday life turned into silent tests. My brother Tyler was born 2 years after me, in 1994. He was the pride of the family, the boy everyone praised, from the preschool teacher to the newspaper delivery boy who stopped by every Saturday morning. I remember seeing my parents' smiles widen at the mere mention of his name. For Tyler, there was always a special place at the table, a bigger slice of cake, a longer congratulations. It was strange, but for a long time I tried to fit into that mold. I never could. Any misstep I made would be the cause of a family gathering in the living room, usually after dinner, with Richard sitting in his favorite chair, crossing his legs and adjusting his glasses so he could look directly at me. Susan sat nearby, her hands clasped in her lap, saying nothing. It didn't matter if it was a bad report card, a dirty sneaker, or a broken plate at breakfast. Everything was magnified. They didn't yell. They did worse. The disapproval came silently, with short sentences, long looks, and that weight of someone expecting you to already know what you did wrong. When I was 10, I was given a blue bicycle as a gift. It wasn't my birthday or Christmas. It was just a random Saturday in October. Tyler had gotten his a few months earlier, brand new, an imported model. Mine came from a garage sale, with the handlebars a little crooked and the paint peeling near the seat. At the time, I forced a smile to keep from showing that it bothered me. Susan made a comment about learning to appreciate what you have, and Richard just said it was that or nothing. There was never any room for questioning. My brother got on his bike and rode down the street, with Richard yelling at him not to speed. I stood on the sidewalk, adjusting the seat, trying to convince myself that this old bike was better than nothing. It wasn't. School was never a refuge either. I often found myself thinking about how Tyler seemed to float through the halls, always surrounded by friends, praised by teachers. I, on the other hand, was the subject of discussion whenever something went wrong. If someone cheated on tests, the principal would call my parents in for a talk. Even though there was no evidence against me, it felt like I was walking a very fine line, where any mistake I made could turn into a scandal at home. I got used to walking carefully, observing everything around me so as not to give them cause for criticism. I became an expert at predicting my parents' moods, just by the way Richard closed the car door or the type of questions Susan asked before dinner. On Christmas Day in 2005, my grandmother Dorothy came to spend the holidays with us. It was the first time anyone from the outside had seen what things were really like. Dorothy asked if I would help her cook the turkey. When I said yes, Susan looked surprised, but said nothing. Later I heard Dorothy say, almost in a whisper, that I was different from the others. That stuck with me. She was the only person in the family who really saw me, who asked questions about my drawings and wanted to know what I thought of things. Over time, I learned to disappear. I avoided having friends over. I spent hours in the library. I threw myself into extra work just to be late. My room was the only space where I had any control. I hid journals in a shoebox, writing down everything I couldn't say out loud. There were details of the silent punishments, the nights without dinner, the conversations interrupted when Tyler walked into the room. It wasn't until much later that I realized, in that house, I had always been the easy target, the daughter who existed to balance the scales, to absorb everyone's frustration. Looking back now, it's clear that none of this was a coincidence. The roles were set from the beginning. If Tyler got a low grade, they said he was too tired because he worked so hard. If it was me, they would lecture me and make the inevitable comparisons. When he broke a window while playing ball inside the house, Richard just said that boys are just like that. When I dropped a glass, Susan made me wash the floor and apologize to everyone, as if it were a crime. Even when I tried to get attention with some talent, like playing the piano or writing, there was always something wrong with my performance. At 17, I got my first job at a coffee shop 3 blocks from home. I started coming home late saying I had to study, but the truth was different. Any time away from home was valuable. It wasn't until June 21st, 2010, when I graduated from high school, that I realized that my family would never see me the way I was. They had other plans, and none of them included truly accepting me. Now answer me honestly. In a family where everything is rules, silence, and demands, what would have been your limit? Write in the comments what attitude you would have taken to not go crazy in an environment like that. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. I thought I knew everything about how things worked back home, but by the time I was 20, I was tired of tiptoeing around. April 23, 2012, was a normal Monday for most people, but for me it was the first real step out of that Oak Ridge scenario. I had just finished a double shift at the coffee shop where I worked, still wearing my coffee-stained apron, when Adam showed up at the door. He was studying architecture at a college a little over 10 kilometers away. He was funny. He seemed to admire even my silences, and he never cared that I wasn't the perfect daughter my parents expected. When he asked me out, I didn't think twice. It was the first time someone seemed to see me without the weight of my last name or my past mistakes. Our relationship was quick, intense, and without any major plans. On the 7th of September of the same year, we walked into an old registry office with a pile of documents and 2 borrowed witnesses. There was no party, no white dress, just a simple lunch in the small apartment that Adam shared with his classmates. That place was full of young people, the smell of noodles and a mess that made me laugh, very different from the controlled silence of my parents' house. At first, it felt like freedom. I woke up late on Sundays, washed clothes in the communal laundry room listening to loud music, ate cold pizza straight from the box, and, for the first time, no one cared if I forgot the wet towel on the couch. The fights that broke out there were about silly things, like who let the milk go sour in the fridge, or who used all the washing powder. I thought I had finally left behind everything that was weighing me down. In January of 2013, Adam got an internship at a construction company in downtown Toronto. We moved into a tiny apartment on Yonge Street. The rent was high, but I was excited about the big city routine. I got a job as a receptionist at a dentist's office. The phone rang nonstop, with more than 40 calls a day, people complaining about pain, rescheduling appointments, and sometimes clients who were furious because they forgot to bring their insurance card. The older secretary, Joan, taught me everything about scheduling, dealing with difficult clients, and even identifying those who just wanted to skip work and use the dentist as an excuse. I liked the hustle and bustle and being able to pay my own bills, even if there was little left at the end of the month. The first few months of my marriage with Adam were good. He insisted on cooking on Fridays, making pastas that he invented himself, and saying that my laugh was the best part of the apartment. We had simple plans: traveling to Niagara Falls in the summer, saving up for a used car, maybe adopting a dog in a couple of years. But over time, things started to go wrong. Adam started coming home late, saying he was swamped with work, but sometimes he didn't even bring his laptop home. The messages on his phone started to appear later, quick conversations, and he got irritated every time I asked why. On Easter in 2014, I caught him lying about a work project that never existed. I found a receipt from an expensive restaurant in his backpack with the name of a coworker from the construction company. My stomach turned upside down. I asked him bluntly, and he didn't deny it. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize. He just said he was tired, that the marriage had become a burden, that I was too complicated. The feeling of being discarded again was stronger than any fight I had ever had with my parents. Instead of screaming, I just wanted to leave. On June 22nd of that year, I packed my things into 3 suitcases, filled a cardboard box with books, and donated the rest. I left without looking back. I rented a room in the back of a lady named Evelyn's house on Bloor Street, a more remote and affordable neighborhood. She was a widow who liked to talk about old soap operas and lent me her dishes because I hadn't even bought a decent mug yet. I spent hours in the room, reading job ads, trying to get my life together, and saving every penny for next month's rent. The freedom that had seemed so close at first turned out to be just another trap. This time, I had no one to share my doubts with, and the silence in the cramped room was different from the silence at home. It was a silence that weighed heavily. I started working part-time at a local grocery store, bagging groceries, and then I got a little extra work at a coffee shop, working late into the night. Every time someone asked me about my family or my marriage, I just said things didn't work out, without giving any more details. In the first 6 months after the divorce, I lost weight, stopped cutting my hair, and learned how to fix leaks on my own. Evelyn used to say that those who learn to change their own shower heads never get scared again. Maybe she was right. I felt further and further away from the version of myself that dreamed of a happy marriage and stability. The scars of what happened with Adam didn't show up in photos, but they were in every choice I made since then. Every job change, every new address, every person I let into my life or kept away. Trust became a rare thing, hard to earn. Looking back, I have no doubt that marrying Adam was the quickest and most desperate way I could find to breathe outside of my family's rules. But no one warned me that running away doesn't erase the scars. And what came next, no one could have predicted. When life pushes us to start over again in a painful way, only those who experience it understand the real weight of it. Leave your like and subscribe, because each chapter here proves that survival is about not giving up, and the worst was yet to come. It took me a few weeks to decide whether I would actually accept my mother's invitation. I had been avoiding family gatherings for a long time, always coming up with a last-minute appointment, an extra shift at the grocery store, any excuse to avoid spending an entire Sunday pretending that everything was normal. But that June of 2022, Sophie was 6 years old and asked me almost every day why she didn't see her grandparents more often. It was on a cold Saturday morning, June 15th. When I received a message from Susan saying that they were having a barbecue, with everyone together, like old times. I looked at my daughter playing in the living room, thought about how she smiled when she saw old family photos, and ended up giving in. I promised myself that this time I would stay just long enough for Sophie to play a little, and would go home at the first hint I got. We arrived at my parents' house shortly after 9:40 in the morning. The sky was clear, and the smell of burning coal was already wafting down the street. Richard was in the backyard, cleaning the old grill with that worn-out brush he always refused to replace. The garden table was already set with colorful plastic plates, cans of soda chilling in an aluminum bucket, and a radio playing 80s music softly, just the way Susan liked it. Sophie ran up to her grandmother with a drawing in her hand, and was immediately greeted with a kiss and a comment about how fast she was growing up. Tyler arrived next, with the same posture as always, talking loudly, laughing as if everything revolved around him. I saw the way my parents settled in when he showed up. It was automatic, as if everything only really started when Tyler entered the scene. In the kitchen, I prepared Sophie's breakfast, cutting strawberries and getting orange juice from the fridge. It was early. The barbecue wouldn't start until after 11. She sat down on the high stool next to the counter and, without asking permission, began to sing. It wasn't a rehearsed song, it was just her happiness spreading through the house. A small, tuneful voice, singing a cartoon snippet while bouncing her legs with excitement. Richard laughed, but quickly told her not to get too excited because the house was small and there was no way to make a mess so early in the morning. Susan pretended not to hear, stirring the pan of eggs as if it were normal. I watched, trying to decide whether it was better to interrupt or let Sophie feel that for a few minutes, the house could be lighter. It didn't take long. Tyler appeared at the kitchen door, leaned his body against the frame and watched, with that bored expression that only he could manage. When Sophie raised her voice a little, he told her to shut up, in the most dry way possible, as if he were giving orders to a dog. I stopped stirring the coffee at the same time. Sophie looked at me but didn't understand what she had done wrong, so she continued singing, this time more quietly. It was at that moment that Tyler quickly approached, grabbed Sophie by the arm and slapped her, without warning. The sound was loud, a sharp impact of skin against skin. The cup I was holding almost fell out of my hand. For a second, no one said anything. Her face was marked, a red line that began to swell almost immediately. Sophie stopped singing and looked at me, trying to hold back her tears, her eyes wide open, not understanding what was happening. My breath caught. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull her close and get her out of there. But I stood there for a few seconds, staring at my brother's face as if I were seeing someone I had never really met. The silence was interrupted by Richard's muffled laughter, who said that she needed to learn how to behave. Susan just sighed, grabbed a paper towel and handed it to Sophie, telling her to not make a fuss. Tyler didn't apologize, didn't explain anything, just walked back into the yard as if nothing had happened. I stood still, watching the movement of the house, listening to the mingled voices in the garden, as if nothing had happened. Sophie stood beside me, the paper towel crumpled between her small hands, unsure if she could speak, or if she should just wait for someone to tell her everything was okay. My hands tingled with anger. My feet stuck to the cold kitchen floor. The smell of coffee became strong, mixed with the smell of raw meat, and nothing seemed to make sense. It was there, in that cramped kitchen, that everything truly changed. I thought I knew what fear was. Until that day, the sound of that slap echoed in the kitchen, as if time had been suspended. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to understand if that had really happened or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I looked at Sophie's face, that red line drawn on her cheek and her wide eyes, searching for some sign in me that everything was going to be okay. There was nothing normal about that. Tyler walked away without even looking back. I felt my entire body stiffen. The cold ran down my back and I wanted to go for him, but I remained still, observing the details of that moment as if I were outside of myself. Richard chuckled, not even bothering to hide it. "She needs to learn shame," he said, like it was one of those old sermons about discipline I'd heard since I was a little girl. Susan was wiping the counter as if what had happened was just another household accident, like spilled milk. I heard my own voice, thin, asking if anyone there was seeing the absurdity of it. No one answered. It was like I was talking to the walls. I could feel my hand shaking, my chest tight, and anger taking over every thought. My daughter was standing there trying not to cry, clutching that crumpled paper towel so tightly that her fingers turned white. I thought about all the times I had been told not to make a fuss, not to draw attention to myself, to accept the family's ways. There were 6 people in the backyard, the smell of meat starting to grill, laughter mixed with old music on the radio. From the other side of the door, it seemed like nothing had happened. But there, in the kitchen, my daughter had just been marked by something that went far beyond the physical. I stared at my parents, searching for a trace of doubt, any sign that they had understood. I found nothing, just that same tone of disapproval, that same invisible order not to cross the line. I don't know how long I stood still before I could move. The digital clock on the microwave read 10:16 in the morning. Every second felt like a new wait. I ran my hand through Sophie's hair and felt her flinch, still not knowing if she should apologize for something or if it was just better to keep quiet. I looked out the window and saw Tyler in the backyard, grabbing a beer, laughing at some joke. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. The whole world seemed to agree with that absurd logic. I took a deep breath and realized that I couldn't pretend anymore. I asked Sophie to look at me. I held her face lightly and tried to smile, but my hand was still shaking. I told her quietly that she hadn't done anything wrong, that no one had the right to touch her like that. She didn't answer. She just nodded, squeezing her eyes shut to keep the tears from falling. There was no room for comfort, not here. not with everyone pretending that nothing was out of place. I walked to the door, opened it slowly, and saw that no one in the yard really cared about what had just happened. Each one was busy with their own plate, their own glass, their own world. It was at that moment that I realized that I could no longer ignore it. That mark on my daughter's cheek was the sum total of everything I had always tried to hide, everything I had never had the courage to truly face. My protective instinct overrode any family convention. But the scariest thing was realizing that no one but me could see the absurdity of that scene. It was as if everyone had become so accustomed to the mistake that they could no longer see what they were doing. The silence in the kitchen was cut by the sound of silverware coming from the garden, a trail of conversations about the previous day's hockey game, plans for the August vacation, anything to distract from the obvious. I stood there, trying to think of how to turn this around, how to protect my daughter from an environment that I had brought her to know. For the first time, I felt afraid of what that family could do if I continued to allow it. But I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. I was still standing in the kitchen when I noticed a detail that, until then, had seemed just part of the scenery. That house, since the previous year, had been full of microphones. It was an old family project. My mother wanted to record everything for a documentary about family roots, memories, those ideas of nostalgia that never matched real life. The microphones were hidden in strategic places, behind the vase in the dining room, attached to the underside of the counter, between the books on the bookshelf. Small, lapel-mounted microphones, connected to a digital recording system kept inside a black box in the hallway closet. My father was proud to have bought everything online, from an American audio equipment website, saying that he was doing everything like real professionals. At the time, I didn't think about it. It was only later, towards the end of the barbecue, that Adam, my brother-in-law, approached me. He's the kind of person who observes more than he talks, always with his cell phone in his hand and an air of someone who's in the know, even when he's pretending to be distracted. In the middle of the idle chatter about football and politics, he discreetly pulled me to the corner of the garage, between toolboxes and Tyler's old rusty bike. He spoke softly, almost whispering, so that no one would notice. Everything was recorded, Lauren. Those microphones picked up everything. I felt my palms sweating right away. It wasn't just a technical detail. It was a total game changer. The slap, the laughter, my father's comment, my mother's silence, Sophie's reaction. It was all recorded in high-definition audio. Adam had already extracted the file from the digital recording system. It was a simple model. All I had to do was plug the flash drive into the USB port and download the content. He handed me a copy, inside a brown envelope, along with a short message. Do what you think is right. I opened the file on my old laptop that same night. It was strange to hear myself in the third person. The voices sounded cold, distant. The sound of Tyler's hand slapping my daughter's face was unmistakable. Then came Richard's muffled laugh, his comment about learning shame, Susan's murmur, Sophie's suppressed sobs. I paused, rewound, listened again. There was no more room for excuses, for doubts, for distorted versions. This wasn't just my word against theirs. For the first time, I had incontrovertible proof, a record of everything my parents had spent their lives trying to normalize. I stayed up until dawn thinking about what to do. The clock on my computer showed 2:24 in the morning when I realized I couldn't sit still any longer. The weight of the envelope on my lap seemed to grow with each passing second. It was as if all the times they doubted me, all the times they said I was exaggerating or making things up, were there, being dismantled in a few minutes of audio. I felt anger, relief, and fear all at once. Anger at what they had done, relief at knowing they couldn't deny it any longer, fear of what might happen when everything came to light. I remembered old conversations. Every time I was called too sensitive, every mark that became invisible on the outside. I also remembered Sophie, sitting on the edge of the bed, asking if she could sing softly before going to sleep, as if asking permission to exist was normal. I took a deep breath, looked at the flash drive resting next to the mouse, and understood that this test changed everything. I could no longer pretend. I could not back down. The digital file was exactly 12 minutes and 42 seconds long. Each second weighed more than the last. There, In the silence of my rented room on Bloor Street, I realized that for the first time in 30 years, I had a real tool against everything my family had built on silence. But I thought I knew what it was like to face the truth, until that night. The last image I have of that barbecue is the backyard getting smaller through the car window, my parents' voices fading into the background, and Sophie's hand squeezing my arm, not understanding what was coming next. I didn't think twice. I didn't even tell anyone. I grabbed my bag, took my daughter by the hand, and ran out that door like someone running away from a fire. The clock on the dashboard read 11:35 when I turned the corner of my childhood home, and I felt like every meter away from there was a relief, but also an anxiety that wouldn't go away. I drove for almost 40 minutes without even noticing the time passing. My phone was buzzing in my purse, messages arriving one after another. My father's number, the family group, even Susan saying that everything could be solved by talking. I ignored them all. I stopped the car in front of Ashley's apartment building, my friend since the first semester of high school. She didn't hesitate for a second when I answered the call with a shaky voice and asked for help. She came down the stairs without shoes, opened the gate with the key still hanging from her finger, and hugged me before asking anything. Sophie held her doll by the leg, looking around, her eyes puffy from trying so hard not to cry. At Ashley's apartment, I made some tea, sat Sophie down on the couch, and let her choose a cartoon. I went to the bathroom and leaned my head against the door for a few minutes, trying to regain control. When I came back into the living room, Ashley had already prepared an ice pack and was quietly asking if I wanted her to call someone. I nodded, not knowing where to start. She sat next to me, not asking any more questions. She just left her hand there, on top of mine, to remind me that I wasn't without support. The next day, I woke up to the sound of my cell phone alarm going off at 6:20. The first thing I did was schedule an appointment for Sophie at the office of Dr. Fields, the pediatrician who had been treating her since she was 3 months old. When I got there, I explained everything, every detail, from the slap to the reaction of everyone at my parents' house. Dr. Fields examined Sophie's face, measured the swelling, took pictures of the area to record in the medical record, and asked delicate questions, calmly writing everything down. I left with a complete report: facial injury to a 6-year-old child, consistent with assault. The medical report would arrive 2 days later, with a stamp, signature, and clinic registration number. The next stop was the clinic of Dr. Cheng, a psychologist who specializes in childhood trauma, who had been recommended by her own pediatrician. Sophie sat on the colorful carpet in the living room, drawing pictures of big people with angry faces and a little girl hiding in a corner. At the end of the session, Chung called me in and explained that Sophie was showing clear signs of anxiety and fear, typical behavior of someone who has been abused by someone they trust. Chung suggested starting weekly sessions and made it clear that emotional recovery would take time, but that this was the right step. Late that afternoon, back at Ashley's apartment, I checked my phone. There were 17 unread messages, 5 missed calls from my father, 3 from Susan, and long audio messages with apologies, requests to talk, and veiled accusations that I was overreacting and hurting the family. Some messages were full of concern, but all I had to do was listen to the tone of voice to sense the manipulation, the same kind of disguised control that marked my childhood. I deleted everything without responding. At that point, any attempt by them to contact me was just another way of trying to change my mind. On her 3rd night away from home, Ashley made herself some soup, laid a blanket on the couch, and turned the TV on low. Sophie was already asleep, holding her favorite stuffed animal. I stared at her, trying to understand how such a young girl had learned to stay silent to avoid trouble. I felt a mix of guilt and anger, as if all the years of trying to protect her from everything had been in vain at that moment. But it was there, in my friend's cramped living room, that I knew that none of that would happen again. For the first time, I felt capable of standing up for those who really mattered, without having to justify or ask anyone's permission. I spent hours that morning writing down everything I remembered from the barbecue, every line, every expression, as if I were putting together a puzzle I never wanted to put together. I looked at the flash drive with the audio, the medical reports, and Sophie's drawing, and I understood that I finally had what it took to break the cycle. But I had no idea how deeply this decision would affect everything around me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, it was like I heard the slap again, my father's muffled laughter, my mother's heavy silence. Sophie's face kept coming back, frozen in that moment, not understanding why no one had defended her. I knew I had to act. I couldn't do it anymore, sweeping everything under the rug, pretending it was normal. I had proof. For the first time, it wasn't just my word. It wasn't just my version. The next morning, I sat at Ashley's kitchen table, my laptop open, my flash drive plugged in, and a list of contacts on my phone screen. I started with Tyler's company, Meridian Financial, where he had worked since 2015. I wrote a direct, no-nonsense email, attaching the audio file and the pediatrician's medical report. I explained what had happened, described the context, and gave the exact time, 10:17 in the morning, June 15th, 2022. My parents' kitchen, Oak Ridge. The send button sat there for a few seconds before I clicked it. My hands felt sweaty, but I didn't hesitate. I also sent it to the compliance department, copying the name of the director I had found on LinkedIn. Next, I looked for the contact information for the NGO that Tyler had been consulting for over 3 years. The website was simple, but it had a form to report abuse cases. I wrote everything again, this time even more clearly, making it clear who the aggressor and who the victim were. I attached the recording, Sophie's psychological report, and asked them not to ignore the complaint just because it came from within the family. I pressed send and felt lighter, but also with a tension in my body that would not go away. Finally, I accessed the portal for the youth mentoring program that Tyler ran. There, in addition to the form, there was a direct phone number for the board of directors. I called. I waited to be answered, listened to music on hold, until a woman answered. I spoke bluntly, in a firm voice. I was clear in every detail, repeating the phrase, "You need to listen to this audio before allowing my brother to continue representing any youth group." She asked me to send the files and promised to forward them immediately to the board. In less than 15 minutes, I sent everything, along with a summary of Tyler's behavioral history. No adjectives, just facts, names, dates, and situations. I spent more than 4 hours sending messages, writing reports, gathering evidence. After everything was done, I closed the laptop and stared at the blank screen. I knew there was no way to predict what would happen, but I also knew I had no choice. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to see Tyler destroyed. I just wanted justice for everything my daughter had been through, and for all the children who, at some point, had experienced the same violence and never had a voice. I thought about how many family meetings I had spent in silence, how many silences I had had to swallow, how many times I had been called over the top for reporting the obvious. I remembered Sophie's look, the way she would tighten her grip every time someone approached too quickly, as if any adult could hurt them again. I needed to show her, and myself, that the truth shouldn't be hidden. Meanwhile, notifications started arriving on my phone, automatic emails confirming receipt, a curt response from Meridian HR saying they would investigate immediately, a complaint protocol opened at the NGO. No reaction from the family, no message from Tyler, absolute silence from the other side. Their emptiness was the loudest response I could have at that moment. My hand felt tingling, my stomach churning, but I didn't back down. I was tired of excuses, of last-minute agreements, of pretending it didn't hurt. It was time to speak up, to expose myself, to end the cycle of silence. I spent the rest of the day sitting on the floor of Ashley's room with Sophie drawing next to me, waiting for some reaction. I didn't have a plan B. I just knew that, whatever happened, I wasn't going to let it go by as if nothing had happened. That recording, that report, every sentence written, was my cry for justice, and nothing was going to make me go back. But I still had no idea how big the storm was about to begin. Within 48 hours, Meridian Financial's response arrived in my email. The message was short and formal, signed by the HR director, informing me that Tyler had been suspended from his duties until the investigation was complete, with the audio attached to the internal file. The next day, his name no longer appeared on the company's website. A former colleague of Tyler's, who had never spoken to me before, sent a message saying that the board meetings were in chaos and that the CEO had demanded immediate action to protect the company's reputation. I didn't need to check LinkedIn to know Tyler had just lost what he valued most: his status, his business card, the prominent position he held in every family conversation. At the children's NGO, the news spread quickly. A volunteer called me, her voice trembling, thanking me for reporting it. The board removed Tyler's name from all promotional materials and that same week released a public statement reinforcing the institution's commitment to the well-being of children. In the mentoring program, his exclusion happened without even a footnote. Message groups popped up for days with screenshots of the recording, circulating among parents, mentors, and even former participants who had already had problems with Tyler's behavior, but were never able to prove anything. The harshest reaction came from inside the house. Jennifer, his wife, showed up at my grandmother Dorothy's house on Sunday afternoon, with a folder full of documents, photos, and exchanged messages that made it clear that the slap had not been an isolated incident. She filed for divorce right there, in front of everyone. She recounted episodes in which Tyler would scream, slam doors, throw objects, and as always, disguise himself so as not to cause a fuss among the family. When Jennifer finished, she left the ring on the living room table and left without looking back. The silence that hung over the room was different from the silence before. It was neither comfortable nor easy to ignore. Dorothy, my grandmother, asked everyone to sit in the living room, the same one she had used for so many parties, Christmases, and Sunday gatherings. The flash drive with the recording spun between her hands until it reached the old stereo that stood next to the wooden rack. I pressed play and let the audio fill the house. With each word, each laugh, each comment, I could see expressions changing. Faces became hard, hands clenched. Even those who had always preferred the outside of the house stood there, not daring to look away. The reaction was not just shock. When the audio ended, there was a strange, tense silence that no one dared to break. Aunt Carol, who lives in Calgary, was the first to speak. She said that years earlier, Tyler had pushed her son, who was only 7 years old, against the wall during a family dinner. She had never said anything, for fear of causing trouble with Richard and Susan. Other relatives began to speak up, recalling situations that, until then, had been treated as childish tantrums or family matters, things that had previously been hushed up for fear of retaliation or embarrassment. I discovered that even neighbors had warned my parents about Tyler's behavior, but everything had always been ignored, covered up with excuses or the old family thing we solve at home line. Richard tried to downplay it. He said that everyone has a bad day, that it was an exaggeration, that they were trying to destroy his son's image. Susan cried, saying that she never meant to hurt anyone, but that she thought she was protecting her family. Dorothy, this time, didn't pat anyone on the head. She said that this house would no longer be a place for abuse, silence, or connivance. She apologized for never having paid attention to the signs, promising that she would never let that happen again. I left with shaky legs. Sophie held my hand tightly, not understanding everything that was happening, but knowing, deep down, that something had changed forever. The family, who had always been quick to judge, had now been forced to look in the mirror, and even without knowing what the next step would be, I knew that there was no way to go back to the way things were before. But what happened next, no one could have predicted. When I left my grandmother's house that night, my entire body felt tired, but my head was pounding from everything that had just happened. I had spent years hearing the same phrases, always the same script. Family is just like that. It was no big deal. You're exaggerating. But for the first time, I saw Richard and Susan not in control of the situation. They tried to follow the usual playbook, minimizing, shifting blame, asking to forget. But the weight of the recording was undeniable. It wasn't just my voice there. It was the sound of the slap, Richard's laughter, Susan's silent approval, all recorded in a way that no one could erase or distort. At first, they still tried to cling to some power. My father said, in front of the whole family, that it was just a little slap, and that I was trying to destroy his brother's reputation. Susan alternated between crying and anger, trying to convince Dorothy and the others that I was creating a storm for no reason, but no one bought it. Not Carol, who always avoided taking sides, nor Jennifer, who had already exposed everything at once. Their uncles, cousins, even the most distant ones, all looked at them with the same look of someone who finally saw what had been hidden for years. Those excuses no longer worked. The mood in the room became dense, a mixture of shame, anger, and a strange feeling of relief at finally seeing the masks fall. The biggest consequence was when my grandmother spoke up and firmly announced, "Sophie is no longer coming to your house. You have lost the right to live with her." No one argued. Dorothy said that if they ever wanted to get back together, they would have to prove they had changed, seek real help, and respect clear boundaries. It was hard to hear that, not because I wanted to stay connected at all costs, but because in that moment I knew the cycle was truly breaking. For the first time, someone had put protecting the child above fear of conflict or embarrassment. The next few days were silent. No calls, no messages. Richard tried to call once, but I didn't let it go past the first ring. Susan sent a long message, full of apologies and attempts to get closer, saying she missed Sophie and asking to talk. I deleted it without reading it all the way through. I always knew that this breakup hurt them more than any argument. Their pride was hurt. Their image of a perfect family was destroyed, and the house was empty on Sundays. For the first time, they had to deal with the real consequences, with no room for manipulation or excuses. Sophie and I moved on with our lives in a more relaxed way. She started attending weekly sessions with Dr. Cheng, and, little by little, she began to sing again without looking over her shoulder. The first time I heard her sing again was on a Saturday morning in Ashley's apartment while she was drawing at the table. I stopped to listen, without interrupting, just silently thanking her for seeing my daughter recover a piece of herself. I realized that the worst kind of scar is not the one that is visible on the face, but the fear of being silenced again. It was this fear that I would not allow to continue. I began to dedicate myself even more to my work. The market manager, seeing my effort and commitment, called me for an administrative position. I accepted immediately. I started studying at home, taking online courses to grow professionally, always with Sophie nearby, drawing or reading. Ashley became part of the family. Without her, I would never have made it through everything. We laughed together, split the bills, and celebrated each small achievement. It was a time of rebuilding, of creating a secure routine, of feeling that I was finally in control of my own choices. Looking back, I can see how guilt and fear work like silent handcuffs in families like mine. If I hadn't acted, everything would have continued as it was, with the next generation repeating the same mistakes. Breaking this cycle wasn't easy. I lost sleep, lost old friendships, and lost any chance of a simple reconciliation with my parents. But I couldn't afford to measure the consequences when what was at stake was Sophie's future and that of so many other children who could go through the same thing. The silence that had always served to protect those who hurt finally turned against those who needed to change. And when that happened, I realized that there is nothing more liberating than seeing justice truly happen, even if it costs everything you thought you needed to be happy. But the process of rebuilding was just beginning, and I still had no idea what complete freedom could bring. The following months were not easy, but little by little, life really changed. Ashley's routine took on a rhythm of its own. Coffee brewed early, a hastily prepared lunchbox, Sophie learning to tie her own shoelaces, small victories that had previously seemed distant. She began calling the living room couch her fortress, making tents out of blankets and filling the apartment with improvised music. At first, her voice was still low, almost whispered. All it took was someone raising their voice or a door slamming for her to shrink. But sessions with Dr. Chung became part of the regular schedule. At each meeting, the therapist recorded progress, used drawings, quizzes, and patiently showed me how confidence slowly returns, from the inside out. The first time I heard Sophie sing loudly again was on a Sunday afternoon. In the middle of the mess in her playroom, she called me over to watch a new cartoon and, without warning, started improvising a song she had made up on the spot. I watched, not wanting to interrupt, because that was the clearest sign that, even after so much pain, it was still possible to start over. I cried quietly in the kitchen, not out of sadness, but out of relief. like someone who gets back what they thought was lost. Ashley noticed, hugged me from the side, and said that we only recognize the value of freedom when we feel the weight of what was left behind. At work, my days started to get more productive. I dedicated myself to online courses and received a promotion that changed our reality. I started taking care of the administrative sector, organizing shifts, contracts, and finances. It was a new challenge, but the confidence I gained there was different from any forced praise I heard at home. For the first time, every achievement was mine, without depending on anyone else's approval. With the salary increase, I was able to rent a small apartment, just for us, in an old building downtown. Sophie helped choose the color of the walls, and we hung her drawings on the refrigerator together, transforming the space into a home. Meanwhile, Tyler had to face his own downfall. I watched from afar as news of the divorce was reported. His name disappeared from the company websites, and calls from his old friends went unreturned. No one celebrated his downfall, but no one tried to cover up what he had done. Jennifer moved on with her life, went back to using her maiden name, and found support in friends who had previously been afraid to speak out. My father and mother tried to be present a few times, but I no longer needed their validation. I responded politely and kept my distance. Dorothy, my grandmother, continued to be my support, always ready to remind me that protecting the little ones is more important than any family pride. Little by little, I began to understand that breaking away from what is bad for us is the hardest choice, but also the most necessary. It wasn't a quick or easy turnaround. Each step took its toll. Nights of anxiety, longing for what never existed, anger over wasted time. But it also brought peace. Sophie's voice, soft and sometimes out of tune, filling the apartment, became a symbol of everything we couldn't lose anymore. I learned through pain and mistakes that true love doesn't ask for silence. Love protects, teaches, and if necessary, screams. Today, when I look at Sophie, I see a strong girl, full of desire to discover the world, unafraid to be who she is. I also see in myself a woman capable of raising her head, seeking help, and building an entire life from scratch. The past still appears in some nightmares, but now it is just a memory, no more prison. The greatest lesson, after all, was understanding that breaking toxic ties does not destroy the family. It only ends the cycle of pain. Freedom did not come all at once, but each note sung, each laugh released, each fearless hug was rebuilding everything that seemed irretrievable. And my daughter's voice, once muffled by shame and fear, became our banner. There is no turning back. Her freedom, and mine, are now part of who we are, and no one can take that away from us. Today, the freedom we have achieved is not just a memory. It breathes in every detail of our routine, filling every space that was once occupied by fear and doubt. The weight of the past will never disappear completely, but now it no longer defines who we are. Seeing Sophie walk around the house, spreading drawings on the fridge and singing loudly, without fear, is the greatest proof that all the effort was worth it. The silence that once served as armor has become a voice. And this voice is not just hers. It is mine too. It belongs to everyone who has ever felt suffocated by the weight of expectations, demands, and the fear of breaking away from what is bad for them. Now you understand the power of breaking cycles. The story you heard here affects each one of us, because no one goes through hurtful family ties unscathed. What happened to me and my daughter could be anyone's story, and the difference lies in not keeping quiet, in not accepting less than what makes us whole. Declare here in the comments, I choose freedom, because only those who have the courage to break the silence understand the value of being the masters of their own lives. I want to see who out there has the courage to say this publicly. Write in the comments and make your voice echo along with mine. You felt the weight of this story. I know this, because stories like this don't just touch you, they leave a mark. Every person who has come this far is already part of this movement, this community that believes that no one deserves to carry the burden of pain, shame, and silence alone. Leave your like now. Your participation makes all the difference so that more people have access to stories that transform, that disturb, that liberate. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, each video is an opportunity to change the course of a life, to learn from the mistakes of others, to never again ignore what hurts. You are not watching passively. You are already part of this story. This community only exists because people like you refuse to ignore what needs to be said. Stories like this aren't just remembered, they're shared. Because when you comment, like, and subscribe, you spread this message to those who need to hear it, to those who haven't yet found the strength to take the first step. Stories like this need to echo to the very end, and you're the one who makes that happen. Don't wait for someone else to do it for you. Become an agent of change now. And now, it's time to go further. What you've experienced here has already changed your view of what courage and freedom are. But the next video will challenge everything you believe about the impossible. Get ready, because what's